It began on a foggy March morning in the quiet suburb of Pine Hollow, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where nothing bad was ever supposed to happen. 12-year-old Emily Carter slung her backpack over her shoulder, kissed her mother goodbye, and walked toward the bus stop at the end of Willow Lane. She never made it there. Her mother, Allison, called the school around 9 a.m. when she learned Emily hadn't arrived. By noon, panic had set in. The police were notified, but the initial response was maddeningly casual. Officers suggested Emily had likely run away for the day. After all, a similar case, her best friend, Sarah Miller, had gone missing just 2 months earlier. Authorities had said the same thing then. But the similarities between the two girls' disappearances were impossible to ignore. Both were 12. Both had vanished on weekday mornings. And both lived just a few streets apart. The town of Pine Hollow, once known for its safety and tree-lined streets, began to tremble under the weight of fear. Parents now walked their children to school. Porch lights stayed on through the night. Every conversation ended the same way, with someone whispering, "Who's next?" At the center of the unease stood a man named Richard Hale, a 42-year-old handyman who lived alone in a weathered blue house near the end of Elm Court. He was known for fixing bikes for local kids and occasionally hosting small get-togethers in his garage. Emily and Sarah had both spent time there, drawn by his friendly demeanor and the promise of free snacks and soda. Years earlier, Hale had faced accusations of inappropriate conduct involving a neighborhood child. But that case never went to trial. The young accuser's testimony had been discredited after a plea deal in an unrelated incident painted her as unreliable. Officially, Hale walked away clean. Unofficially, rumors clung to him like shadows. When Sarah disappeared, Hale gave interviews to local news crews. He called her a sweet girl and claimed to be helping the search effort. He even invited reporters inside his home, proudly showing his workshop and the collection of tools he used to build toys for kids in need. The charm worked. Public suspicion faded, and Sarah's disappearance was quietly labeled a runaway case. But now, with Emily missing, the pattern was too striking to ignore. That night, Allison Carter sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of coffee. Her husband, Greg, was out driving the neighborhood with a flashlight. Volunteers combed the woods and creeks near Willow Lane, calling Emily's name into the mist. Detective Laura Briggs, newly assigned to the case, watched from her car as neighbors gathered in tight circles under streetlights. She had read every file from Sarah's case, and saw the same early mistakes being made again. The following morning, news crews returned to Elm Court. And once again, Richard Hale stood in front of the cameras, smiling nervously, insisting he wanted to help. He repeated the same phrases he had used 2 months earlier: "These girls were like family to me. We need to stick together. I just want them home." But something about his tone felt rehearsed. When a reporter asked about the new slab of concrete visible in his backyard, a small patio he claimed he'd poured for a fire pit, Hale chuckled and waved it off. "Just a little project," he said. Detective Briggs took note of that detail. Because in the photograph from 2 weeks earlier, the one in Sarah Miller's missing person file, there had been no patio at all. The next chapter in Pine Hollow's nightmare was about to begin. By the third day of Emily Carter's disappearance, Pine Hollow no longer felt like the safe, storybook suburb it once was. Parents kept their children indoors. School buses ran half-empty. Flyers bearing Emily's smiling face fluttered on telephone poles, their corners curled by cold spring rain. Detective Laura Briggs worked tirelessly, setting up a command post in the small conference room at the Pine Hollow Police Department. Maps of the neighborhood covered the walls, marked with colored pins showing the last known sightings of both Emily and Sarah. The patterns overlapped almost perfectly: same streets, same times, same direction of travel. Yet the similarities didn't stop there. Both girls' phones had gone silent within minutes of leaving home. Both had last been seen walking past Elm Court, where Richard Hale lived. Despite these facts, some officers still leaned toward the runaway theory. "They're kids," one veteran detective muttered. "They'll turn up. They always do." But Briggs wasn't so sure. Something in her gut told her this wasn't coincidence. And Hale's sudden eagerness to help, his interviews, his open-house attitude with reporters, only deepened her suspicion. So, on the morning of March 17th, she paid him a visit. The house on Elm Court was small and tidy. A wind chime clinked in the cold air, and the faint smell of wet cement hung in the yard. Hale opened the door before Briggs even knocked. He was smiling, too much. "Detective," he said, voice smooth, "I was wondering when you'd come by." Inside, everything appeared carefully arranged, clean counters, neatly stacked magazines, photos of fishing trips on the walls. Hale poured coffee for her, talking easily about how he'd helped search for Emily, how he'd always looked out for the neighborhood kids. Briggs scanned the room quietly. On a shelf behind him sat a collection of small trinkets, bracelets, hair clips, even a keychain shaped like a dolphin. "Kids leave stuff here all the time," he explained, noticing her gaze. Outside, she stepped into the yard, boots sinking slightly into damp soil. The new patio, he'd mentioned to reporters, stretched out from his back door, a fresh concrete slab, light gray against the older foundation. When she asked how long it had been there, he answered too quickly, "About a month." But his building permit, checked later that afternoon, was dated just 1 week before Emily disappeared. By evening, the police finally classified Emily as an endangered missing child. Volunteers from neighboring towns joined the search. Drones swept over nearby woods. Divers scoured the shallow creek behind Pine Hollow Elementary. And still, there was nothing, no footprints, no items of clothing, no trace at all. Then, a break, though not the one anyone hoped for. A call came in from a gas station clerk on Route 7. He believed he'd seen Emily 2 days earlier, getting into a white pickup truck with an older man. The surveillance footage, however, was grainy. The vehicle's license plate was unreadable. Still, Briggs thought she recognized something familiar in the driver's build: tall, thin, balding. She compared it with old photos of Hale. The resemblance was chilling. The next morning, detectives returned to Elm Court with a warrant to search the property. Hale, looking pale but composed, met them at the door. "You're wasting your time," he said calmly. "I've got nothing to hide." As officers began combing through his home, Hale lingered nearby, offering explanations for everything they touched. "That's from my niece. Those are just old toys I found at a yard sale." In the basement, they found bags of concrete mix, unopened. In the garage, a workbench with tools meticulously cleaned. Nothing illegal. Nothing overtly damning. Yet everything felt wrong. The slab outside was tested with ground-penetrating radar. The machine beeped faintly, detecting irregularities beneath the surface, voids, density shifts. "Could be debris," one technician said. But Briggs felt her pulse quicken. Before they could break the slab, however, the district attorney insisted they needed stronger probable cause. Hale's lawyer, quick to appear, as if already waiting for the call, warned that the department would face legal backlash if they damaged property without full approval. Frustrated but powerless, Briggs ordered her team to back off. Hale stood at his window, watching the patrol cars leave. And then, for the first time, he smiled, not the polite grin from before, but something else. Something triumphant. That night, Allison Carter sat alone in Emily's bedroom, clutching her daughter's favorite hoodie. Outside, the news replayed footage of Hale speaking kindly to reporters, assuring everyone he just wanted justice. But across town, in a darkened police office, Detective Briggs stared at the photograph of the fresh concrete one more time and whispered to herself, "He's hiding them. I know it." She had no idea how close she was to the truth. Within a week of the search, Richard Hale had become both a local celebrity and the community's most whispered about name. The media loved him, the helpful neighbor who claimed he was being unfairly suspected. Each night, he stood in front of news cameras, his calm tone contrasting the chaos around him. "I just want Emily home," he'd say, eyes glassy with emotion. "I know how it feels to lose someone. I cared about Sarah, too. I helped look for her every single day." It was a performance that worked. Viewers at home saw a sympathetic man under pressure, not a potential predator. Donations for search efforts poured in. Volunteers gathered in his yard before heading out to distribute flyers. He even organized a candlelight vigil at the elementary school. Allison Carter stood beside him that night, her face streaked with tears, unaware that the man comforting her might have been the last person to see her daughter alive. But Detective Laura Briggs wasn't fooled. Behind the cameras, she studied him quietly. He thrived on attention, she realized, the way he lingered near microphones, the way his story subtly changed with each interview. Sometimes he said he'd last seen Emily riding her bike past his house. Other times, he claimed she stopped by for a soda. It was as if he couldn't resist putting himself into her final moments. Briggs brought her findings to Captain Harris, the head of investigations. "He's playing us," she said flatly. "He's inserting himself into everything. This isn't grief, it's control." Harris sighed. "You've got instincts, Laura, but we can't build a case on instincts. We need evidence." Evidence. That was the problem. Hale was too careful. Every search turned up nothing more than circumstantial clues: clean tools, empty bleach bottles, a new patio no one could touch yet. And now, the DA's office was warning them to tread lightly after Hale's lawyer filed a complaint about harassment. Still, the cracks were starting to show. Neighbors began whispering about odd behavior, how Hale had been digging at night weeks before the slab was poured. How they'd heard hammering long after midnight. One neighbor, an older man named George Riley, even remembered seeing something covered with a tarp near the shed behind Hale's house the same night Emily disappeared. But he hadn't thought much of it at the time. When Briggs questioned Hale again, his composure slipped. "Why do you keep coming after me?" he snapped. "You people ignored me when Sarah vanished, and now you want a scapegoat." "You were the last person to see both girls alive," Briggs replied evenly. "You think that's just coincidence?" Hale's voice dropped to a whisper. "Maybe you're looking in the wrong direction." He leaned closer, eyes cold. "You ever think their families know more than they're saying?" Briggs stared back, unflinching. She had met enough liars to recognize one trying to deflect. He was confident, maybe too confident, because he still believed the police couldn't touch him. But his arrogance became his weakness. A week later, Hale's adult son, David, contacted the police. He'd been estranged from his father for years, but after watching the news coverage, he felt uneasy. "He loves attention," David said quietly. "But when he starts talking about missing girls, it's like he enjoys it. Always has." Then he added something that made Briggs' heart pound. "When I visited him last month, he told me not to go near the shed. Said he was storing paint and supplies in there. But I caught a smell, like rot and chemicals mixed together. I didn't stick around to ask questions." That was enough for a new warrant. On a chilly April morning, Briggs and her team returned to Elm Court. This time, no warning, no advance notice. Hale opened the door, startled. For the first time, his calm expression faltered. "What now?" he muttered. "We're searching the shed," Briggs said simply. The backyard was silent except for the sound of boots crunching over gravel. Hale followed, pale and trembling slightly as the officers broke the padlock on the shed. Inside, the air was thick, the floor covered in sawdust. A workbench stood against the back wall, but something was off. The boards near the far corner were uneven, the nails newer than the rest. "Here," Briggs said. As officers pried the boards loose, a sharp, nauseating odor filled the air. Even the most seasoned detectives stepped back. Beneath the floorboards lay a shallow cavity lined with plastic. And within it, fabric, bone, fragments of hair. Silence fell over the yard. "Get forensics," Briggs said quietly. "Now." Richard Hale's face turned ghostly white. "That's not," he began, but the words died in his throat. His lawyer wasn't there this time to interrupt. Within hours, the remains were confirmed as belonging to Sarah Miller, the girl who had vanished 2 months before Emily. The news broke that evening, and Pine Hollow erupted in outrage. Parents wept, reporters swarmed, and Hale's house became the epicenter of fury. But even as police escorted him away for questioning, Hale looked strangely calm, almost resigned. When a journalist shouted, "Where's Emily?" he turned briefly toward the camera, smirked, and said, "You'll find her soon enough." Detective Briggs stared at him through the one-way glass of the interrogation room later that night. She knew that expression, that smug half-smile. It wasn't guilt. It was pride. And it meant Emily Carter was somewhere very close. By dawn the next morning, the quiet suburb of Pine Hollow had transformed into a media circus. Satellite trucks lined Elm Court. Reporters shouted questions over police tape. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering, crying, clutching each other as if their street had become something unrecognizable, a place where innocence had died. Detective Laura Briggs barely noticed the noise. She was focused entirely on the fresh slab of concrete stretching behind Richard Hale's house. It gleamed under the early light, still slightly uneven in color, as if it had been poured too quickly, with too much urgency. The discovery of Sarah Miller's remains in the shed had confirmed what Briggs had suspected all along, but she knew it wasn't over. There was still Emily Carter, missing for 22 agonizing days. And Briggs was certain she hadn't left that yard either. As forensic teams swarmed the property, Hale sat in the back of a patrol car, staring out through the glass. His hands were cuffed, but his expression was eerily calm, detached, almost curious. He had been read his rights, but he wasn't talking. Not yet. "Start with the slab," Briggs ordered. The crew worked methodically, setting up barriers to shield the excavation from cameras. The first crack of a jackhammer shattered the morning stillness. Dust rose into the air, blending with the smell of damp earth and gasoline. Briggs stood a few feet away, notebook in hand, eyes fixed on the ground. Hours passed. At 1:17 p.m., a call came from the site lead. "Detective," he said quietly, motioning her over. She followed him past the machinery, stepping carefully over broken chunks of concrete. Beneath the slab lay a rectangular cavity, just large enough for a child. Inside, wrapped in plastic and layers of tarp, they found what they had been dreading. Emily Carter. Her small hands were still clutching the strap of her backpack. Her shoes, still tied, were caked with gray dust. Briggs knelt beside her, the noise of the machinery fading into nothing. For a moment, she couldn't move, she could only whisper, "We've got her," her voice breaking. The recovery took hours, every moment witnessed by a silent crowd of officers who had fought to find her. When the stretcher finally emerged, covered gently in a white sheet, the neighborhood fell quiet. Parents held their children closer. The world seemed to slow. In the patrol car, Richard Hale turned his head to watch. His lips curved faintly, not into a smile, exactly, but something close. Detective Briggs stepped toward the car. "You buried her under your own backyard," she said, voice low and trembling with restrained fury. "Why? Why keep pretending to help?" Hale's eyes lifted to hers. "I told you," he said softly. "You'd find her soon enough." He refused to say another word. That evening, the police chief held a press conference. He confirmed the remains of both Sarah Miller and Emily Carter had been recovered at Hale's residence. The charges were clear: 2 counts of capital murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. Reporters pressed for motive, but the chief offered none, only a grim shake of his head. The town mourned together that night. A vigil was held in the park where Emily used to play. Hundreds gathered, holding candles against the cold wind. Allison Carter stood at the front, flanked by Sarah's parents, her face pale and unreadable. Detective Briggs watched from a distance, wishing she could offer comfort, but knowing nothing she said could erase what had happened. Meanwhile, in his holding cell, Hale sat on his cot, humming faintly. When guards asked what he was singing, he said it was a lullaby his mother used to play, something to help little girls fall asleep. His tone was almost tender. But when the guard walked away, Hale whispered under his breath, "They should have stopped looking after the first one." By midnight, Detective Briggs sat alone in her office, reviewing the timeline. Sarah had vanished first. Emily, months later. Both had been close to Hale. Both silenced before they could speak. And now Hale was right where he wanted to be, the center of attention, the name on every headline. But as she looked at his file, one phrase from his interrogation echoed in her mind: "You're looking in the wrong direction." It had sounded like deflection then. Now, it felt like a warning. Had someone else helped him? Had he done this before? Briggs leaned back, staring at the evidence board. 2 faces, 2 dates, 1 man. And somewhere deep down, she knew, this case wasn't finished yet. 2 days after the discovery of the bodies, Richard Hale sat across from Detective Laura Briggs in a small, windowless interrogation room. The air felt heavy, a mix of stale coffee, anxiety, and something unspoken. The room's single light flickered softly over the table between them. Hale looked calm. Too calm. He wore the same gray hoodie he'd been arrested in, now wrinkled and stained. His wrists were cuffed loosely to the table, and his fingers tapped a slow rhythm against the metal surface. Briggs knew that rhythm well, it was the pattern of control. A man trying to own the silence. 2 girls, Briggs began quietly. 2 lives taken. You buried one in your shed and one under your patio. Why, Richard? He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Why, he repeated. You ask that like you think there's an answer that would make sense. Briggs didn't move. Try me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a tone almost conversational, he murmured, "Sarah was talking too much. I thought she'd learned her lesson after that first time, but," he stopped, a faint smile curling at the corner of his mouth. "She started telling stories again. About me. You know how people twist things." Briggs felt her stomach tighten. "She wasn't twisting anything," she said, her voice low. He ignored her. She wanted attention. Kids do that. But then she told Emily. And Emily was loyal. She wanted to help her friend. She told me she might go to the police. He paused, looking down at his cuffed hands. So I stopped her. Briggs stared, unblinking. You silenced her. He met her eyes then, his expression eerily serene. I protected myself. The system already failed me once. I wasn't going to let it happen again. Her voice trembled just slightly. You mean when you were accused before? Hale chuckled, a quiet, dry sound. Accused. That's the word they like to use. Nobody ever proved anything. They said the girl lied. That's the beauty of it, detective, people lose faith in victims so easily. You just have to give them a reason. Briggs leaned forward. So Sarah was the reason you killed Emily. He nodded slowly. In a way. She wouldn't have been in danger if Sarah hadn't opened her mouth. But after Sarah, things got easier. I knew what to do. Emily trusted me, she always did. She came by after school sometimes, just to talk. That morning, I offered her a ride to the bus stop. She smiled, said she was cold. His voice softened, almost wistful. She never saw it coming. Briggs felt her throat tighten, but she kept her tone steady. And you thought you could hide her forever? Hale's smile widened. No one ever digs where they don't want to look, detective. People avoid ugliness. That's how I stayed safe. That's how people like me always stay safe. The silence stretched long and unbearable. When Briggs finally spoke, her words cut through it like glass. You're done, Richard. You'll never walk free again. Hale leaned back, closing his eyes as if savoring the sound. Maybe. But I'll live longer than they did. He refused to speak again after that. The formal confession was transcribed, signed, and entered into evidence. For investigators, it was the final piece they needed, but for Briggs, it was hollow victory. The details haunted her long after she left the room. That night, she drove to the Carters' home. Allison answered the door, her eyes hollow and red from crying. Briggs didn't speak at first, she just stood there, rain dripping from her coat. Finally, she said softly, "He confessed." Allison's voice broke. Why would he do it? Emily never hurt anyone. Briggs hesitated. There was no right answer. Because he could, she said quietly. Because he wanted control. Allison nodded slowly, tears falling silently. I prayed every night that she wasn't scared. Briggs took her hand. She wasn't alone long. We made sure she came home. The trial was scheduled within months. Hale's public defender advised him to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty. He agreed, on one condition, that he be allowed to speak at sentencing. The courtroom was packed the day he did. Families filled every seat. Reporters lined the back wall. When Hale stood to address the court, the atmosphere shifted, the air felt colder somehow. I'm not here to beg, he began, his voice calm and clear. I did what I did. I did it because I was tired of lies, tired of being painted as something I'm not. You all made me into a monster long before I ever did a thing. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Briggs watched from the front row, jaw set. You want to know what makes men like me? Hale continued. It's your disbelief. You see the signs, but you ignore them. You think you know your neighbors. You don't. You never did. He smiled faintly, almost proud. They were just kids. They trusted the wrong person. That's not on me, that's on all of you. The courtroom erupted in outrage, but Hale didn't flinch. The judge silenced the room and delivered the sentence, 2 consecutive life terms without parole. Hale turned his head toward Briggs one last time as he was led away. You'll remember me, he said. She did. And so did Pine Hollow. For the families, justice came, but peace did not. Because everyone in town knew the truth behind his final words, Richard Hale had not created the darkness. He had simply revealed the cracks that had been there all along. The trial of the state of Ohio versus Richard Hale drew national attention. By the time summer arrived, Pine Hollow, once a sleepy suburb where kids rode bikes and neighbors swapped homemade pies, was swarming with journalists, true crime bloggers, and satellite vans parked on every street. The courthouse, an aging brick building downtown, became the stage for a story too awful to believe. Inside, Allison Carter sat beside Sarah Miller's parents on the front row every single day. They didn't speak much, grief had carved their faces into masks of quiet endurance. Sometimes Allison would clutch Emily's old bracelet, the one she used to wear to school. Its small heart-shaped charm glinted under the harsh courtroom lights. Detective Laura Briggs, called as a key witness, watched from the side as the prosecution laid out its case, methodical, deliberate, devastating. The prosecution's case. Prosecutor Ellen Shaw began her opening statement with words that silenced the room. Richard Hale buried his guilt under concrete. He buried the truth under his shed. But no amount of cement can hide what he did to those girls. The evidence was overwhelming: Hale's confession, the forensic matches, the timeline. Even the concrete itself told the story. Microscopic traces of Emily's clothing fibers were embedded in the mix. Cell phone data placed Hale near the bus stop both mornings the girls disappeared. And then there was his son, David Hale, who testified with trembling hands. "He told me not to go in the shed," David said. "He said there were things I didn't need to see. I thought he was just being strange like always. I didn't know." Every detail was like a wound reopening. The defense's strategy. Hale's public defender didn't attempt to prove innocence, that would have been impossible. Instead, he painted a portrait of mental instability. Childhood trauma, social isolation, a father who had been misunderstood by society. The defense argued that Hale's confession wasn't the statement of a sane man, but of someone detached from reality, a delusional soul seeking recognition, not redemption. The jury didn't buy it. Throughout the proceedings, Hale sat silently, expression unreadable. He never looked toward the families. He spent much of his time scribbling in a small notebook, occasionally glancing up with faint amusement when photos of evidence appeared on the projector screen. On the seventh day of testimony, something unexpected happened. During a recess, Hale turned toward Detective Briggs as she walked past the defense table and said, almost casually, "You'll miss me when the cameras leave." Briggs didn't stop walking. "No," she replied, "I'll remember you when the lights go out." The verdict. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman's voice was steady, guilty on all counts. A collective breath swept through the room. Allison buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Hale, for the first time, looked directly at her, not in remorse, but with something colder. Pride. The judge's tone was firm as he handed down the sentence. "Richard Hale, for your crimes against 2 innocent children, you are hereby sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole." The courtroom erupted in relief, anger, grief, a tangled storm of emotions. Hale was escorted out, still wearing that faint, detached smile, as if even the weight of forever behind bars couldn't touch him. But for Pine Hollow, the sentence wasn't an ending. It was a mirror. The aftermath. In the weeks that followed, the town struggled with its guilt. People asked how they had missed the warning signs, the complaints that had been dismissed years earlier, the whispers ignored, the concrete slab no one questioned. Parents who had once trusted Hale with their children couldn't bear to look at their own backyards. The police department faced its own reckoning. An internal review exposed mishandling of Sarah's original disappearance, reports misfiled, witness statements left unverified. The assumption that she was a runaway had cost weeks that could have saved Emily's life. Several officers were reassigned, and new protocols were introduced for missing children cases statewide. Detective Briggs testified before a state committee, her voice measured but tired. "We failed because we assumed," she said. "Because we didn't believe that evil could live behind a picket fence." Allison Carter avoided the cameras. She withdrew from public view, choosing to grieve privately. Neighbors left flowers on her porch for months. Sometimes, at dusk, she was seen sitting in a lawn chair, watching the empty bus stop at the end of the street, the same one where her daughter was last seen alive. And in the middle of town, Hale's blue house sat behind a high fence, its windows boarded, its yard overgrown. It became a place people crossed the street to avoid, a scar in the heart of Pine Hollow. Yet amid the pain, something shifted. The community began to rebuild, slowly, quietly. Vigils turned into awareness campaigns. A scholarship fund was established in Emily and Sarah's names for young girls interested in law enforcement, created to turn fear into strength, as Allison wrote in a brief statement. Still, every once in a while, someone would mention Richard Hale's name, in the grocery store, at the diner, outside the church. And every time, the same uneasy silence followed. Because Pine Hollow had learned that monsters didn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes, they smiled for the camera. Autumn crept quietly into Pine Hollow that year. The trees that lined Willow Lane turned to deep shades of amber and red, the kind of beauty that once made the town feel like something out of a painting. But beneath the color and calm, grief still lingered, the kind that seeps into the soil and never really leaves. The blue house on Elm Court remained sealed, surrounded by a tall wooden fence erected by court order. Most of its windows were boarded, its mailbox gone. Neighbors avoided the property entirely, as if even walking too close could invite misfortune. Some called it the Hollow House. Others just whispered, "That's where it happened." Detective Laura Briggs transferred to the county's newly formed Missing Persons Task Force. Her name had become synonymous with the case, the detective who wouldn't stop digging, literally and figuratively. But the victory had come at a cost. She had seen too much of what silence could do. Too much of what denial could destroy. Sometimes, when she drove home late from the precinct, she'd take the long route through Pine Hollow. She'd slow down as she passed the bus stop where Emily Carter vanished, now marked by a small memorial with flowers, teddy bears, and two tiny engraved plaques: Emily Carter, age 12. Sarah Miller, age 12. Never forgotten. The school had planted 2 trees beside the stop, one for each girl. They stood side by side, thin but growing stronger each year. Allison Carter eventually moved away. Too many reminders, too many memories she couldn't escape. She left quietly, leaving behind Emily's favorite bicycle, rusting against the back fence. Before she left, she stopped by Detective Briggs's office with a small envelope. Inside was a photo, Emily and Sarah on Halloween, smiling, their faces painted like tigers. On the back, in Allison's careful handwriting, were 4 words: "Thank you for finding her." Briggs kept it pinned above her desk. Across the state, Richard Hale began his life sentence at Greenfield Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison surrounded by endless stretches of gray fencing. Even there, he found ways to stay in the headlines. He wrote letters to local journalists, rambling about misunderstood motives and false narratives. Most went unanswered, though one letter was published in a tabloid months later, fueling a brief storm of outrage. It didn't last. In prison, Hale's influence faded. His arrogance, once so visible, was swallowed by monotony. Guards said he spent his days pacing, humming, sometimes muttering to himself about projects left unfinished. He died 4 years later, in his cell, of a sudden heart attack. No family came to claim the body. The state buried him in an unmarked grave behind the prison walls. For Pine Hollow, his death brought a muted sense of closure, not celebration, just quiet relief. The monster was gone. But the scars he left behind would outlive him. In time, Pine Hollow began to heal. A new family bought the Hale property. They tore down the shed, removed the concrete patio, and built a small garden in its place, rows of lavender and rose bushes swaying gently in the breeze. For the first time in years, birds returned to the yard. The neighbors started walking their dogs past the house again. Every May, on the anniversary of the girls' disappearances, the town gathered in the park. They lit candles, released paper lanterns into the evening sky, and spoke the girls' names aloud, a promise never to forget, never to assume, never to ignore warning signs again. And when the lanterns drifted upward, fading into the dark, Detective Briggs always looked to the horizon and thought of Emily and Sarah, 2 children who had trusted too easily, and a community that had learned too late. As she watched the last lantern disappear, she would whisper the same words every year, a quiet vow carried on the wind. "You're home now. And we'll keep you safe this time." The lights of Pine Hollow glowed softly behind her, and for the first time in a long time, the town finally slept without fear.